And welcome back. We go into the second segment of our show this morning, and we have with us on the couch this time around Carlos Fuller.
The iconic
Carlos Fuller. He's the International and Regional Liaison Officer for the 5 Cs, and we're going to be discussing climate change this morning. Good morning, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning, gentlemen. It's a pleasure being here.
All right, so the topic is our changing realities, a climate change review perspective. What can we begin with in terms of some of the things that we need to know currently about climate change and how we're being affected?
Well, certainly we recognize now that climate change is a reality. It is not something we have to worry about next year or 10 years or 100 years from now. It's affecting us already. We're seeing it in higher temperatures globally. Temperatures have risen by over 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. In Belize, it's pretty much the same thing. The data from the international airport and across the country shows that from the temperature has risen by 1 degree already. So in fact, it is warming up in Belize higher than what we're seeing at the global level. We're seeing sea level rise and across Belize, tremendous erosion as a result of sea level rise, but also of more storms. So we have stronger waves coming in, eroding our islands and the mainland. We're seeing impacts on agriculture with more heat stress. We are seeing impacts on the ecosystems inland with the pine bark beetle infestation in the early 1990s. So we are seeing the manifestations of climate change already, and in particular, this past year, the hurricane season, we saw so many Category 5 hurricanes in the region that we had never seen before. And the science shows us that with climate change, we will not necessarily have more hurricanes, but we'll be having more strong hurricanes and less of the weaker ones. So indeed, the impacts, we're already feeling it.
Wow. When you look at areas of Belize, when you mentioned erosion, the first thing that came to mind is the Monkey River situation, where this is a coastal community where people used to make their bread and butter, so to speak, from fishing.
Yes.
And when you look at that community in the wake, or I'm not sure if it's still an ongoing thing, but when you look at Monkey River now, seeing all the beachfront that has washed away, you can't even say, Kevin, that, for instance, it can be a tourism destination, because there really isn't much to see on the coastline. You'd have to go upriver and into the forested areas surrounding Monkey River. That's the result of climate change, correct?
That is, we believe climate change is playing a part there, but I think there's also a study showing that some of the things we have been doing upriver has also contributed to it. Okay. But indeed, that is a manifestation of what we were seeing across the world with climate change. Not only the fact that you're losing your livelihoods, but your whole cultural heritage has been lost.
Yeah.
I recall going down there and people telling me, 20, 30 yards out to sea, that's where I got married 30, 40 years ago. The graves are now underwater. I mean, that's the kind of cultural heritage you're going to lose, not only in Belize, but across the world. And so, in fact, under the Climate Change Convention, a big thing we're discussing right now under what we call loss and damage is migration, how people will have to start to migrate. Obviously, if Monkey River continues to go underwater, that village will have to move. And nations in the Pacific are thinking they may have to move. Tuvalu and so on may actually have to. Some of them are actually buying land in other countries where they can put their people in the foreseeable future.
That's a lot to digest, indeed. Climate change. Most often, people get the impression that we're only discussing hurricanes and things that happen out at sea. But I'm glad that you mentioned the pine bark beetle infestation from a couple of decades back, where this was predominantly in the central areas of the country, so to speak. Shed some light on that, because a lot of times we tend to think, as I mentioned earlier, climate change only have to do with sea and rising sea levels. Speak to us about how we're being affected inland as a result of this ongoing phenomenon.
Well, basically everything in nature is affected by the climate, and so one of the issues that occurred with the pine forest was that there is a bark beetle that is always there, and it will eat some of the pine, but with proper management, they can affect one tree and not really affect another one. But if the trees are very close together, and in addition, if temperatures are warmer than normal, where they can reproduce more quickly, and the humidity is high, then they can explode. And that is really what occurred back in 1990. But not only in Belize, in northern Mexico, across the western US, even up into Canada, they saw the same thing, where these pine bark beetles, because of that higher temperatures and higher humidity, they really just exploded, and they wiped out, I think in Belize it was like 75% of our pine forest was decimated. But in addition, there is the repercussions of it. So eventually, as these trees die, they fall, they rot, they emit more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as they rot, but then they leave the pine hills, the hills deforested. When the rains do come, there is no roots to hold in the soil. You have all this soil washing off into the river. Our rivers end up red with soil, wash out to the reef, and that an additional impact on the reef and on the fishing. So, I mean, it is a vicious cycle, all of them building one on the other.
There are lots of issues when you talk about climate change, and there are limited resources. I'm sure that there are probably only a few, I don't know how many stakeholders who are directly assigned or focusing on the issue of climate change, apart from the meteorology service. What are we focusing on in Belize? Because we can't do everything.
Right.
So what is our focus this year in 2018?
Well, I must say, I have to commend the government of Belize in the past several years that they have, at the highest level, have really taken climate change on board. So, for example, when we look at the infrastructure projects that are now taking place in Belize, they all come under climate resilience umbrella. So, funding that as we now borrow for our roads and bridges, they're now taking the climate change with the World Bank, with the IDB, with the Caribbean Development Bank. So, for example, the refurbishment of the Northern Highway between the Halover Bridge and the airport, it was actually raised higher than it was normal, bigger culverts to put in, because they went back and they did the engineering studies to see how will the climate going to change in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And so they made that into account. They took in an extra loan to make sure that is being done. So this is the kind of work that you now have to do. Instead of saying, well, I'm not going to worry about climate change. I mean, traditionally, in the past, engineers, architects, and so on, when we are designing anything, we look at the past 30 years of data. What was the climate 30 years ago? And that's what we design for. Now, how it is going to be in the future. You build for the future, not for the past. And so I said, I think we really have to commend governments, especially in Belize, that we are not taking that on board as we start to do this long-term planning. Because it's useless, you're spending the same money over and over to rehabilitate something. A school may be flooded every year. Well, instead of spending that money every year to fix a school that is flooded, why don't you move the school to a more a safer area, higher ground, that won't be, you spend more money at the outset, but then you know you're safe for the next 20, 30 years.
Let me ask a question, and I think it's one of those questions that is very relevant in light of what happened last week, for instance.
Yeah.
Is it that, well, growing up, I was, and perhaps you can correct this notion, but growing up, we were taught, well, Belize is more a country that's in the hurricane belt, so to speak, than it is in the earthquake belt.
Right.
But of late, we have been experiencing tremors from massive earthquakes in neighboring countries, and we still feel the impact of it here.
Yeah.
Is it that that is being taken into consideration now, or there's serious focus on the fact that we are also affected by seismic activity within the region?
Well, I think we always have. Certainly, our building codes that we have used, that our architects and engineers buildings have always taken that into account as they have been building their structures to withstand a certain level of seismicity based on our location, because we are near Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Salvador. known areas of earthquakes. We also have the Cayman Trench that begins near Haiti, goes through the Cayman Islands, and then cuts into the Bay of Honduras along the Belize-Guatemala border. So that is an area known for seismic activity as these two plates meet there. So that has been taken into account generally. What we have not really been addressing very much has been the issue of tsunamis. However, back in 2004, you recall there was a big Indonesia tsunami, the Indian Ocean. The following year, it was recognized that globally, the world has to start to take a look at tsunamis. And the Caribbean had a meeting, and it was then determined that we would use the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center as our warning center, just as the way the National Hurricane Center in Miami issues the regional warnings for hurricanes. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center does the same thing for the Caribbean and on an interim basis back in 2005. I think it was 2016, it became the permanent one. The word interim was removed because the idea back then was maybe the Puerto Rico Center could become it, but it was determined that, look, we were duplicating work that can be done and we can use those resources to put in more monitoring systems and so on. So that is really how we now monitor earthquakes and tsunamis in the Caribbean. Well, tsunamis in the Caribbean. That is, as soon as there's an earthquake, the Tsunami Warning Center would get that information, liaise with the USGS, United States Geological Survey, ascertain what is the strength of the earthquake, and then based on that strength, they issue a preliminary warning. Because with a tsunami, you have to act right away.
Yes.
With a tsunami, you don't have time, I have to go and buy bread, and I have to go and buy rice, I have to go fill up my gas tank. No, with a tsunami, you go upstairs.
Yeah.
That is it. I mean, Japan has the best tsunami warning system in the world. You recall a few years ago, there was this major earthquake, and with the best in the world, you saw the loss of life and what occurred.
Yeah.
So it is, you don't have time to think. That is where I think now we need to go into an educational system.
Yes.
People have to learn where you are, where if something happens, where do I go? Where as soon as you feel the earthquake, you see the sea receding, boy, something is happening, let me go upstairs. You know, whether it is on a stage, whether it is up a stairs, you just need to go up. You don't have time to move out.
Are we going to see an increase? First of all, has there ever been a tsunami occurrence in Belize or in the Caribbean? Have we ever experienced one?
In the Caribbean, yes. So, for example, with the Haiti earthquake, was it 10 years ago? The island right offshore Haiti went underwater. A 6 foot went over it. We have had a major tele-tsunami when there was a major earthquake in Portugal centuries ago. That wave went across the entire Atlantic Ocean and inundated the areas of Antigua and so on. So yes, tsunamis have occurred in the region. One of the ones we are looking at what could occur if Montserrat had a major eruption and half of that island fell into the sea. It creates a big tsunami. Kikinjeni, between Barbados and Grenada, there's an underwater volcano there. If that were to explode, it could generate a tsunami. So the potential is there, and we have to be aware of it.
What measure of protection do we have? We just had a gentleman from the Healthy Reef with us. Doesn't the reef give us some level of protection? I mean, it's like a wall, right? So the tsunami is coming. That saves us. We can go on and live our lives without having to worry about this thing.
Well, except it's a very small wall. and the thing is, we know with fringing reefs around islands, it reduces the threat of a tsunami as that reflects the wave. Because don't forget, a tsunami, it's a wave, it's not a current. So it's like when you take a rope and you do it, and you see the wave go along the rope. So the same with a tsunami. So certainly, if the tide is low and the reef is high, it will break that wave. But we have inlets throughout the reef. It's not a contiguous thing. So that wave would translate in there, and then it would then spread out again. So we really have to do a lot of good computer modeling to see exactly what would be occurring with a tsunami, depending on the size of the wave that comes in. And that depends on the kind of earthquake and the strength of the earthquake.
And the depth of it as well, right?
That's correct, yeah. Because one of the things is with earthquakes, when you have a really big tsunami, it is when the plate lifts against the other one and the sea rises. Well, if you have this kind of rowing motion, you will not necessarily get you might get the same strength of earthquake, but not necessarily the tsunami or that size of tsunami. So all of those things really you have to look at.
In terms of the preparations that we have, I know the education campaign, at least from the area of the city where I live, has not been as strong, if any existent any at all. But is the underlying work being done in terms of the studies, like you said, in terms of where would be affected most? How do we respond? What is in place? For example, tsunamis.
Yeah, well, I said the issue with tsunamis is that we are really at the incipient stage of that as it is. And in fact, there is going to be a tsunami exercise in the Caribbean in March of this year. It was planned months ago, so it is, we have something to work with.
Yeah.
And in fact, to build up to that, there are going to be 2 teleconferences next week and the week after to talk about that exercise and to begin to talk to the Tsunami Warning Center in the Pacific to answer questions. What is it that Belize has to be concerned about? So it is an ongoing thing because we really, we have heard about tsunamis, but what is going to be the impact on Belize, we really don't know at this stage. So our really thing is we just have to act. And then as we generate the studies, we need to do it. There are several things that we have to do to get the studies done. We need better topographic maps, our elevation maps. We need better bathymetric maps. That is, how high is the sea, the different depths of sea going out. All of those studies still have to be done, not only in Belize, but across the Caribbean. It is an area very badly lacking in the Caribbean.
That's frightening because particularly in Belize, the whole wild tale is that we're significantly below sea level. So I'm thinking if a wave is coming at 6 feet and we're 100 feet below sea level, that's 106 feet.
Well, no, I would not say we are below. Belize City is not below sea level. It is at, and some areas slightly below, but not.
So it's a myth.
So it's a myth.
We are at sea level. We are very, very vulnerable. With a hurricane, with a 25-foot storm surge, we are in serious trouble. Back in 31, in 61, we had 15 feet of water downtown Belize City, which destroyed the city twice, which is why we have them upon. But indeed, it is not that exaggerated that we are way below sea level.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's go back to the issue of climate change in respect of the responsibility of people and how what we do affect the weather and the climate and what have you. There's a lot of times I think that we either underestimate the role that we play in terms of how climate affects us. A lot of times people walk around and they don't realize that emissions and all these other things create some of the very same conditions that we are now facing. Can you speak to the responsibilities or the roles of individuals in terms of playing their part in the whole process, if I may?
Certainly, we recognize, and the science is telling us that humans have caused climate change. Because of our use of fossil fuels, we are burning a lot of petroleum and coal going back from the Industrial Revolution. Even agriculture, all the cattle and so on that we are producing, they produce a lot of gas. They are contributing to it. The industrial processes that we are using produce these greenhouse gases. So yes, we are contributing to it. The big drive now is that we need to then change the sources of energy we are using to go to more renewable sources of energy. So instead of bringing in diesel to burn in a diesel generator, we're now using hydropower. We are now using the bagasse from sugar. We are putting in solar powers. We're using wind turbines. Those things that don't emit greenhouse gases is the way we need to move forward with. The area in Belize where energy is concerned that is really high is in our vehicle fleet.
Yeah.
So while in electricity production we're doing a great job there, we are really burning a lot of petroleum as we are moving around the country. We are using inefficient vehicles, gas guzzlers. Our mass transport system is not the most efficient in the world. And so that's an area we really, really have to address. And I believe the Ministry of Energy, along with the Ministry of Transport, are now working in that area. That is an area in climate change that they're working together on. So that's really what we have to address as we go forward. So at the individual level, that is where then we as individuals contribute to the problem by if we are using inefficient lighting systems, our cooling systems. In general, we tend to retrofit things. So we build a wooden house, and then we decide I need an AC, and so we try to put plastic over windows.
Yeah.
So we have to have some foresight now if you're going to do that. We almost everybody now seems to have to sleep with a fan at night, when before we never had to do that. Think about what you're burning there, with water faucets dripping, and you don't think about it, but that means that Belize Water Services has to pump more water out of the river, push it up here for us to allow it to drip.
When you look at the idea that some people can't sleep without fan, for instance, I think about cause and effect. Simply because it's hotter at night now, where before it was cool.
Very true.
So you need a fan, right? But then in the process of using a fan, you're burning electricity, which has its own effect. It's like a circular kind of a thing, where whatever you do on this end comes back in another form, a manifestation on another end. That is just one immediate thing that comes to mind.
But let me go back even before that though. Look at how we changed the type of buildings we did. When I was growing up, all the houses in Belize were wooden, were built on stilts. They had open windows. Air used to flow through. Now, and we had high ceilings.
Yeah.
Now we make some small concrete things, and they get very, very hot during the day.
Yeah.
There is no circulation. So we have exacerbated the problem.
Less trees gone, though.
That's true.
In terms of, you touched on a point there which is dear to me, which is emissions. And you also, before that, was speaking about the absence of regulation in certain areas. Is there anything in the works? Because I think that is an easily fixable problem. When you're licensing your vehicle, this has to be the standard, not necessarily the year. But I know in America in fact, I know for a fact that in America there are a part of the car that you have to put on, which monitors what comes out.
Right.
In Belize, what we do, because it affects the fuel usage, we take it off.
That's right, yes.
Is there anything specifically in the works? Do you know of anything, any regulations, any subcommittee to specifically start to put the framework, the legal and the departmental framework in place to start to address these things?
To the best of my knowledge, I'm not aware of any at this stage. I think at this stage we are just trying to see what kind of policies and measures could be put in place to then determine how we go. I'm not aware of any. I know, for example, in El Salvador, you cannot bring in a vehicle that is more than 10 years old.
Yes.
Sorry, you cannot bring it in. So
Belize, you can only bring in a vehicle which is older than 10 years old.
Yeah. So those are the things that really, I think the studies are now being undertaken to determine what, based on our economy, can be put in place in Belize, to do those things, monitoring of emissions. But I think much more importantly, proper traffic management, the proper scheduling of buses. All of those things have to be put in place, and then I believe those other legal instruments then put in place to empower the policy.
We seem to be a step behind with climate change. When we discussed about the tsunami, you spoke about the surveys and the reports that have to be done first before we can even make steps.
Yeah.
And then now we're talking about the policies that could be put in place. We seem to be one step behind. Is there not a sense of urgency in terms of getting this done, one? And two, aren't there certain small things that can be done? I know America, for example, does daylight saving time.
Yeah.
We're getting Christmas weather now, in my opinion. This is what should have happened December 22nd.
November, December, right?
Yes. Are we making a simple thing like I know when I lived in Jamaica? What they did was they changed the hours, they staggered the hours for workers. So some workers went in to work at 8, some went in at 9, and then they closed off at 6, some at 5, and they worked through the lunch period. What that did was to free up traffic so you didn't have this congestion, and it also allowed to use up some of the daylight,
Sure.
which comes a bit earlier, because it's not as stark as in America. But, well, in the north. But we do have a change for those people who are morning persons. It gets darker at different times.
Yeah.
Why do we appear to be just maybe a half step behind? I'm being very kind.
Yeah. Well, no, I agree. I mean, like, one of the things we know that occurs from 6:30 to about 8:30 along this northern highway, it takes you an hour to get from Ladyville to Belize City.
It's a bottleneck.
Yeah. And I think we have to come up with an innovative way where we're looking at the traffic management part of it, but look at the congestion that occurs at the roundabout, at the Belcan Bridge. People from the south side trying to get people to school while this traffic is coming in. Obviously, it creates a traffic jam there that has to be alleviated at some point. And that is where I believe that staggering could occur, where if we change the school hours opening, not clashing with 8 o'clock opening of work, that may be one of the solutions that we would need to think about. You know, how do we address those things? But again, I think it's going to be at that much higher level that kind of policy would have to be considered, and to see what would be the drawbacks. I mean, I can understand a parent saying, but I'm coming into school now, I have to come to school. You know, I have to do something between an hour between my work and getting a child to school. So all these things really we have to think about.
Talk to me about the political will, for instance, to really look at coming up with regulations and implementing regulations. We have the Department of the Environment. We have an entire ministry that deals with environment, natural resources, and all of these other things. But is there the will for those who are in office to begin to seriously look at putting in certain measures that protects us, protects the environment as well, so that we can mitigate the effects of climate change?
I think there is. So, for example, the Department of Environment does a fantastic job in regulating the areas that they have a mandate to address. But then you also have to look at the economic benefits. Yes. So and the same thing, we applaud Oceana for its very strong stance against offshore drilling. But then you have the possibility of becoming a wealthy nation through the exploitation of your mineral resources, as Guyana is now doing. I mean, they keep finding things, and that's the way they're going. So it is, how do you obviously you have to do a balance. Yes, you want tourism, but you do want and tourists want to be on a beach, but you do want to cut down the mangrove to protect the beach. So the tourists are not going to come if there are mosquitoes because of the mangrove. So you have to really weigh these balances, and I think that is where again you need to you have to have that overall vision, that a Ministry of Economic Development, but looking, okay guys, if we need to have this kind of money in the next 10, 20 years, then this is how we need to plan, whether it's in agriculture, in food processing, making sure where you plant, as opposed to people fighting for the same land to live, as opposed to farming. So it's a delicate balance. It is, and I don't envy the policymakers who have to try to come up with those.
And can we even afford to actually pay climate change and the things that we need to do? Can we afford to? I know that the issue of climate change isn't a settled issue. Even our friends in the frozen north, there's a big argument as to whether it even exists. Is it a rich man's thing?
No, well, no, I think it is a development issue. So you need to take climate change, as you know, into your development into concern. So I go back to the individual person. If you are given a piece of land, or you want to acquire a piece of land right along the coastline, and you don't take climate change into account, and you start to pay, and you take a mortgage out for 20, 30 years, and when you pay your final check, 20 years, you're under 1 foot of water, you wasted your money. So it is not a rich man thing to me. It's what you really think about as you're doing that development. But in addition, through the international response to climate change, funding is now being available. Grant funding, concessional loans are being available through various aspects. And the developed world is committed to provide the developing world with $100 billion per year to address climate change. So we can access funding through those mechanisms. It's either going to be grant, depending on the kind of investment it is, or it could be concessional loans. So, for example, if you have a private sector, obviously nobody's going to give you money to make money. You take out a concessional loan. But if it is, hey, I need to protect Monkey River, obviously they need a grant kind of funding, whether it is to put in a sea wall or to replenish the beach, to do something. That is a kind of funding that is available, and we are now starting to apply for that kind of funding.
All right. Is there anything else you would want to conclude with in terms of what we need to know about climate change? Anything that the center, for instance, is working on that Belizeans ought to be aware of?
Certainly, I want to reiterate that climate change is not something to think about in the future. Yes, so we're having this long cold snap, and this is one of the manifestations of climate change. Not only the warming, but you're having more erratic weather patterns. We saw the manifestation a couple of years ago. Very few mangoes, because the mangoes kept blossoming and losing because the mango tree was confused. This year, things are looking good this year. So it is a reality that is occurring now. At the center, we are continuing to develop projects across the region to access the kind of funding I talk about, the Green Climate Fund. We have a couple of projects for Belize that we are now looking at in the areas of renewable energy and coastal protection. And the country of Belize is now undertaking a couple of projects also, preparing its second national communication, its fourth national communication. This is what the Belize has to do a report, like a report card to the Creamore Convention on Climate Change on what we are doing to address climate change, what are the impacts, what are our vulnerabilities, and we are doing an update report on our emissions. How much emissions are we doing, and what are we doing to address those emissions? So yes, Belize is tackling it at various levels, at the national, but also at the regional level.
Perfect. Well, Mr. Fuller, thanks for stopping by this morning to discuss with us climate change and how Belizeans are affected and how Belizeans can play a role in addressing the situation as well. Once again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been my pleasure.
We're going to take a commercial break, and when we return, it's to discuss with our friends from the Belize Cancer Society the pap smear campaign that they are embarking upon. We'll take a commercial break, and when we come back, we jump into that discussion.